My name is Nasime Saps.
Let me ask you a question. Has anything ever happened to you that you couldn't explain? That made you feel sort of foolish when you tried to tell somebody about it? Well, if it has, you have plenty of company, as you'll soon see.
Tom, he had to decide what he wanted to do with his life. Now, at first, he wanted to become a professional wrestler because as a teenager, well, he was a huge fan of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he was willing to do whatever it took to be just like his idol.
Honestly, I'm just so tired. I just want to go.
If you're excited to drop your brand new video, give me a hell yeah, Tom.
Hell yeah, Steve. Hell yeah.
So when he was just 14 years old, well, Tom, he began training for his future in the wrestling ring. Within 6 months, he was having his very first wrestling match. A year later, he was on a bi-weekly wrestling television show in Canada called Canadian Wrestling Legends.
There's a flag with the lady in a red shirt and a white is a rascal as she gets tipped over there. Spit up. Oh! They get spot of the match. Oh yeah, here we go. And let's draw heat.
Now, because Tom was wrestling while still in high school, he was placed in a unique educational system known as ISDL, or Independent Self-Directed Learning. After graduating from high school, Tom, he would go on to work as a professional wrestler for a handful of years. Now, all in all, he worked the wrestling circuit for 6 years, including promotions like Prairie Wrestling Alliance and Monster Pro Wrestling.
In the fall of 2005, following the year he wore the championship belt, professional wrestler Chris Benoit was at the top of his game. In the ring, with the body of an Adonis, he was slamming opponents, being slammed, and putting on a show. "19 months later, during the weekend of June 22nd, Chris Benoit would suffocate his wife Nancy, their 7-year-old son Daniel, then would walk into the basement of his suburban Atlanta home and hang himself. He was 40.
Before Tom Macdonald would begin his professional career as a wrestler for organizations like Elite Canadian Championship Wrestling and Real Canadian Wrestling.
All-star Tom Macdonald making his way to the ring, weighed in at 182 pounds.
Thomas Macdonald was born on September 21st, 1988 in a very small town in British Columbia known as Mission, which is about a 2-hour drive outside of Vancouver. There, Tom spent the first 13 years of his life attending a school known as Albert McMahon Elementary. Then when he was a teenager, his family, they packed up and they moved to Edmonton, Alberta. Now, he would live here for the next 6 years, and he attended a ton of schools, including York Elementary, Steel Heights Junior High, J.J. Boland Junior High, and St. Joseph's High School.
At his home outside Edmonton, Mike Benoit was in mourning. It was 4 days after his son's family was found dead in their Fayetteville, Georgia home. The headlines declared his son a suicidal murderer.
But the throne was finally passed down to Alexander III's son, Nicholas II, in 1894. The final ruler of the Romanov dynasty would have his time cut short. Leading up to his abdication, Nicholas II's poor track record as a leader resulted in his unpopularity with the people of Russia. His bad decision-making and poor leadership led to a war fought and lost with Japan in 1904 in an attempt to expand the country. In 1905, after the loss of Japan, the people held a protest in St. Petersburg, demanding reform. More than 100 people died, and hundreds more were wounded when police fired shots into the peaceful protesters. The event became known as Bloody Sunday, and instigated the revolution of 1905, which forced the Tsar to create the Duma, a representative assembly that he had the authority to close when he was unhappy with it, creating greater distrust by the Russian people. Finally, during World War I, as the man in charge of the military, Nicholas led his people into conflict that put an enormous strain on the nation's resources and the loss of millions of lives. Soldiers lacked the necessary munitions to fight and began deserting the military. Those back home faced severe food shortages, and women also took up work outside the home as men were off at war, but their wages were minuscule compared to the men's wages. All of this earned him the nickname Nicholas the Bloody. His position with the people of Russia was displeasing, to say the least. He was also known to be chronically indecisive, with a joke circulating the country that the most powerful people in Russia were the Tsar and whoever had spoken to him last. Despite public opinion, Nicholas was a family man and well loved by his wife and children. By all reports, the Romanovs were happy and devoted to one another. Nicholas II was married to Alexandra, Tsarina of Russia, who had a more powerful and imposing personality than her husband. Being German by birth and the granddaughter of Britain's Queen Victoria, Alexandra had some struggles of her own when it came to her status with the people of Russia. She was generally viewed as an outsider, causing the Tsarina to become highly sensitive, controlling, and paranoid. She reportedly had a high-strung temperament and needed constant attention and solicitude. The couple had 5 children, 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, who were known as the Grand Duchesses of Russia, and 1 son, Alexei, who was the youngest of the family and also who would have inherited the throne. Alexei was born in 1904 with hemophilia, a bleeding disorder which causes blood to not clot properly. During a time where most upper-class parents were generally not very close to their children, Alexei's condition was the foundation of the Romanovs' close familial bond. His ailment also created a bond between his mother Alexandra and the mystic and self-proclaimed holy man from Serbia, whom she was highly influenced by, Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin managed to gain the trust and loyalty of the Romanovs through his ability to comfort Alexandra with her anxieties, reassure Nicholas as a leader, and most of all, his healing powers when it came to Alexei's hemophilia. He reportedly significantly lessened Alexei's pain as he underwent a severe bleeding episode in 1908. To the Romanovs, Alexei's delicate condition and Rasputin's ability to aid him made Rasputin company worth keeping. Eventually, Rasputin secured his place of influence in the palace after he allegedly warned Alexandra and Nicholas that Alexei's health would be linked to the strength of the Romanov dynasty. This closeness with Rasputin further isolated Alexandra from the Russian people. March 1917, an announcement made to the people of Russia of an upcoming rationing would stir up the beginning of the end of the Romanovs. On March 8th, International Women's Day, just days after the rationing news, women went on strike, demanding food and the end of the Tsar's rule. By the end of the day, 100,000 protesters who filled the streets of St. Petersburg, which had become Petrograd after the outbreak of World War I, became no match for the Duma, who desperately attempted to regain order. The protest took place while Nicholas was in Mogilev with the military. When Nicholas was away, Alexandra took over in his absence and was often influenced by her confidant Rasputin. A closeness frowned upon by the public, as Rasputin's power over the family led to suspicions that he had his own political agenda. The Duma begged Nicholas to choose someone to form a government that the public would trust, but instead, he sent in the troops. His underestimation of the situation resulted in a giant blunder. As the protesters were mainly made up of women and the troops greatly sympathized with their cause, they abandoned their post and joined in with the protests. Nicholas was forced to return home, and as he began his journey back, Alexandra and their 5 children were advised by the chairman of the Duma to flee Alexandra Palace, just outside of Petrograd, as their safety was threatened by the turbulence.
I used to love to be in public. Now I'd rather be alone. And even though it's difficult, it's probably for the best. If I didn't make a change, I would have drank myself to death.
Thus, he gave up his vices and he turned his gaze inward to figure things out. With the help of people like his good friend Brendan Hart and the woman who would one day become his partner in crime and his best friend in the world, Nova Rockefeller. We'll have more on her in just a second. Now, Nova would go on to shoot and edit all of Tom's music videos over the years, and her wealth of knowledge pertaining to the industry, well, it's kept him on the right path navigating the business side of things. Now, she's the teammate that Tom never knew he needed, but she would wind up saving his life. After 13 years of friendship, well, they graduated to something more, and the pair, well, they've been together as a couple for over 4 years now. In terms of his process, well, Tom works as hard as he possibly can, putting in 20-hour days consistently. He figures if he can outdo himself each and every day, he'll eventually get to a place he wants to be in his life. And with hit tracks like Coronavirus and Best Rapper Ever, well, I'd say that Tom, he's closer than ever to accomplishing his dreams. Now, there was a while there where Tom, he had to fight for his life every single day for 9 months straight, where the minutes they felt like days and the days felt like eternity. Now, not only did he survive that ordeal, but he overcame his vices, and Tom, he wants anyone who listens to his music to know that they can do it too. As cliche as it may sound, tough times don't last, tough people do. And those are the last words that Tom, he would like to leave for all his fans.
While within the city. The power and water to the palace were cut off, and more troops continued deserting their posts to join the uprising, leaving Alexandra and her children unprotected from the enraged crowds rioting in the nearby Petrograd. With her husband not yet home, and their children sick with measles, Alexandra refused to go. March 15th, 1917 marks the day the Romanov dynasty officially came to an end after over 300 years of ruling. Nicholas II was met in Pskov by two representatives of the Duma, who presented him with an announcement that the Duma was assuming power to restore order within the nation, leaving Nicholas no choice but to abdicate. He named his brother Mikhail as his successor, instead of his intended successor, his son Alexei. Mikhail refused the throne the following day after Soviets demanded the end of the Romanov rule.
So Tom, he started writing raps in secret. Now, he even started writing them while he was still a professional wrestler. Now, by the time his pro wrestling career had ended, well, he knew what his next move was going to be. He bought professional software and recording equipment, and he started making his own beats.
It's kind of like a weird thing, actually. I was like a professional wrestler, like the WWF stuff, before the music came along. And then just due to a lot of different circumstances, I sort of got out of the wrestling thing, and I just had all this, you know, pent-up creativity. I've just always been that kid.
Right.
And I always just really loved music.
Before long, he was working with a producer known as OV and dropping his first album, Leanne's Son. Around this time, he moved back to Vancouver on his own and started collaborating with a rapper named Matt Brevner, dropping his first music video, Dark Side of the Moon. Now, at first, he thought he had to write songs about money, girls, and cars because that's what popular rappers do. Now, this only led to inner turmoil that was further fueled by things like drinking, weed, and partying. Also, that other stupid shit that tends to get in the way. Now, things got so bad there were days when he couldn't even manage to eat something as simple as an egg or a piece of toast, not to mention the sleepless nights which had him turning into a shell of his former self. In fact, Tom, he had something of a mental breakdown not too far along into his musical career. Now, this event, it radically changed his life after spending a year in a really bad place, not making any music, while he realized that he wasn't being authentic to himself.
I used to love to be in public, now I'd rather be alone. And even though it's difficult, it's probably for the best. If I didn't make a change, I would have drank myself to death.
Thus, he gave up his vices and he turned his gaze inward to figure things out. With the help of people like his good friend Brendan Hart and the woman who would one day become his partner in crime and his best friend in the world, Benoit Rockefeller. We'll have more on her in just a second. Now, eventually, Tom, well, he made it out to the other side. Not only that, well, he learned what was important to him and that he had things he wanted to say in his music. It was then in 2017 that he was experiencing his first real signs of success with his track, Dear Rappers. Nova would go on to shoot and edit all of Tom's music videos over the years, and her wealth of knowledge pertaining to the industry, well, it's kept him on the right path navigating the business side of things. Now, she's the teammate that Tom never knew he needed, but she would wind up saving his life. After 13 years of friendship, well, they graduated to something more, and the pair, well, they've been together as a couple for over 4 years now. In terms of his process, well, Tom works as hard as he possibly can, putting in 20-hour days consistently. He figures if he can outdo himself each and every day, he'll eventually get to a place he wants to be in his life. And with hit tracks like Coronavirus and Best Rapper Ever, well, I'd say that Tom, he's closer than ever to accomplishing his dream.